Welcome or welcome back, whichever one applies to you. Today I'm going to be trying to do something a little different. Excuse me. 1 second. I found this article that was on just my Google main page, and I thought I would read it as I do and give my opinion on it. I'm not like a journalist or anything, so this is going to be a bit new for me, but I'm going to try to give as much information relevant to this article as I can. And I have multiple tabs pulled up with information. And hopefully we can learn a little something together. This article is titled, "The U.S. has a controversial plan to store carbon dioxide under the nation's forests." It's written by a journalist, I suppose, by the name of Julia Simon. And let's see. It starts off with, "In recent years, lots of American companies have gotten behind potential climate solution called carbon capture and storage." If I slur a little bit, it's because my freaking tooth over here is broken. Sorry about that. And the recent presidential administration has backed it with billions of dollars in tax incentives and direct investments. The idea is to trap planet-heating carbon dioxide from smokestacks of factories and power plants and transport it to sites where it is injected underground and stored. But the idea is controversial, in large part because the captured carbon would be shipped to stored sites via thousands of miles of new pipelines. Communities nationwide are pushing back against these pipeline projects and underground sites, arguing they don't want the pollution running through their land. Now, it says there's been a ton of pushback, but until I saw this article, I and the people I live with have not even heard about this. So, like, for the most part, I think it's being kept fairly quiet, because apparently these pipelines already exist, and yeah, no one that I know knew about it. No. 1 second. Sorry about that. I have to chase my mom's cat out of my room or he'll freaking destroy my camera setup. Alright, picking up where I left off. I apologize. Now, the U.S. Forest Service is proposing to change a rule to allow storing this carbon dioxide pollution under the country's national forests and grasslands. Authorizing carbon capture and storage on NFS lands would support the administration's goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% below the 2005 levels by 2030. The proposed rule change says. That's a direct quote. But environmental groups and researchers have concerns. Carbon dioxide, CO2, pollution will still need to be transported to the forest via industrial pipeline for storage. The forests via, alright. Says June Sakira, a research fellow with Boston University. To get the CO2 to the injection site in the midst of our national forest, they've got to build huge pipelines, Sakira says. All this huge industrial infrastructure that's going to go right through. Sakira says building those CO2 pipelines may require clearing a lot of trees. Yeah, so They're going to chop down large parts of our forest to build pipelines to combat greenhouse gases instead of, I don't know, planting more trees, going directly to the factories to try to decrease the amount of pollution that they're producing. And there are concerns about pipeline safety. If a pipeline breaks, CO2 can displace oxygen, and the plume can be hazardous to humans and anything else that breathes, says Bill Karam, executive director of the nonprofit watchdog group Pipeline Safety Trust. In 2020, a CO2 pipeline ruptured in Satarsha, Mississippi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Sending at least 45 people to the hospital. Some of those people report they are still suffering from lingering health issues. I'm going to pause right there and go over to this tab, which describes carbon dioxide poisoning. Let's see, I don't care about the philosophy. Yes, I know the human body produces it. At higher concentrations, carbon dioxide leads to an increased respiratory rate, tachycardia, cardiac arrhythmia, and impaired consciousness. Concentrations above 10% may cause convulsions, coma, and death. Solid carbon dioxides may cause burns following direct contact. If it is warmed rapidly, large amounts of carbon dioxide are generated, which can be dangerous, particularly within confined areas. The management of carbon dioxide poisoning requires immediate removal of the casualty from toxic environment and the administration of oxygen and appropriate supportive care. In severe cases, assisted ventilation may be required. And apparently carbon dioxide is used to make dry ice, which can burn the skin, but that's not too relevant here. And there you go. So in high concentrated forms, which is what's being put into the pipelines, it can be extremely dangerous. And 45 people were sent to the hospital as a result of. Pipeline ruptures could pose a threat for people recreating in forests, or recreating? I don't know. Plus wildlife, says Victoria Bogdan Tejeda, attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. The thing about CO2 is it's a deadly asphyxiant, whether it leaks near a town or whether it leaks near a forest, Bogdan Tejeda says, or Tejeda. CO2 is an odorless gas, making it harder to detect, and plumes can spread for miles. Bogdan Tejeda, I'm just going to pronounce it Tejeda, notes that often in national forests there is bad cell service. If people found themselves in trouble, they may have a hard time calling for help. And some researchers and environmental groups are concerned that the carbon capture and storage technology behind the proposed rule change is being used to extend the life of fossil fuel operations. Climate scientists say the world needs to rapidly reduce its use of fossil fuels like oil and natural gas to limit the devastating impacts caused by climate change. Carbon capture and storage often doesn't work well, says Bruce Robertson, an independent energy finance analyst. They are not capturing at the rates they said they would capture, and they don't store at the rate that they're supposed to store. An analysis of some of the world's largest carbon capture and storage projects by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, a nonprofit think tank, found most of them underperformed on emission reduction targets, and many were over budget. Many of the proposed CO2 pipelines in the U.S. have faced fierce local opposition. Last month, the company Navigator CO2 canceled a proposed CO2 pipeline that would have traveled across Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, South Dakota, and part of Minnesota, citing unpredictable state regulatory processes. Some experts, like Sakara, questioned the timing of the proposed rule change, given community pushback across the country to pipelines planned on private land. They say Forest Service proposed to open national parks for CO2 storage is an end run around local towns and counties, and it's much simpler and way less expensive route. In an email, Scott Owen, press officer for the Forest Service, writes that the proposed rule change would allow the Forest Service to consider proposals for carbon capture and storage projects. He writes that any proposals must still pass through a secondary screening, adding the Forest Service has been screening proposals for use of National Forest System lands for over 20 years as a means to be increasingly consistent with our processes, and also to be able to reject those uses that are incompatible with the management of the public's land. He notes that the Forest Service currently does not have any carbon capture project proposals under consideration. The Forest Service has opened public comments on the proposed rule change until January 2nd, 2024. It's important to note that this will not be anything you can vote on. So that's fun. The people's opinion is not in consideration here, except for the, comments that you're allowed to leave that I doubt anyone will read, that will not be available in 2 months. So that's that article. On my next page, I just have a bunch of freaking different sites that are talking about CO2 pipelines. Here's an ad by ExxonMobil saying, reduce your emissions by utilizing ExxonMobil's low-carbon solutions like carbon capture. Accelerate the world's path to net zero by reducing emissions with ExxonMobil. A lot of it sounds disingenuous. Here's one for a company called Honeywell. Implement carbon reduction practices with Honeywell's carbon capture solutions. A new standard for CO2 removal. Here's one talking about the proposed plan to put a pipeline from Minnesota to South Dakota. So, the top 4 sites, the first thing you're going to see if you look it up is things promoting it and trying to sell it. And then if you scroll down... Oh my god, did I leave that playing? I'm dumb. Let's see. CRS reports by Congress/government says that they're essential components in carbon capture. And then if you go way down, you have pstrust.org saying CO2 pipelines it says carbon dioxide pipelines are dangerous and underregulated, and they're susceptible to ductile fractures, which can, like a zipper, open up and run down a significant length of the pipe. The Sierra Club says that Iowa has 3 carbon dioxide pipeline proposals, and they're centered around carbon capture and storage. Then you have grist.org, which is talking about the promises to pump it into the ground. You have CO2 storage by... I don't even know what site this is. But yeah. So obviously the companies that are going to make money off of it are promoting it. And the organizations that are against pollution are against it. Surprise, surprise. Now let's talk about the event in Minnesota. This is the most recent report on it. In Satartia, Mississippi, on February 22nd, 2020, a man by the name of Damaris Debray Burns, his brother and his cousin decided to go fishing. They were headed home in a red Cadillac when they heard a boom and saw a big white cloud shooting into the evening sky. Burns first thought it was a pipeline explosion. He didn't know what was filling the air, but he called his mom, Thelma Brown, to warn her to get inside, and he told her he was coming. Brown gathered her young grandchildren and great-grandchildren she was watching, took them into her back bedroom, and got under the quilt with them and waited. They didn't come, Brown says. 10 minutes, and I knew they would have been here in 5. They didn't come. Little did she know, her sons and nephew were just down the road in the Cadillac, unconscious, victims of a mass poisoning from a carbon dioxide pipeline rupture. As the carbon dioxide moved through the rural community, more than 200 people evacuated, and at least 45 people were hospitalized. Cars stopped working, hobbling emergency response. People lay on the ground shaking and unable to breathe. First responders didn't know what was going on. A quote from the emergency director of Yazoo County, Jack Willingham, says, "It looked like you were going through the zombie apocalypse." Now, 3 years after the CO2 poisoning from the pipeline break, some in Satartia see the incident as a warning at a critical moment for U.S. climate policy. The country is looking at a dramatic expansion of its carbon dioxide pipeline network, thanks in part to billions of dollars of incentives in last year's climate legislation. Last week, the current presidential administrations announced $251 million for a dozen climate projects that focused on CO2 storage and transport. The story of the pipeline rupture and its lasting effects was first reported in HuffPost in 2021 by Climate Investigation Center. The center obtained recordings of the 911 calls and shared them with NPR, which is the site I'm currently using, by the way. This is a report on NPR. Let's see. Where was I? There are now 5,300 miles of CO2 pipelines in the US. But in the next few decades, that number could grow to more than 65,000 miles, says Jesse Jenkins, professor of engineering at Princeton University, who has researched scenarios to reduce US emissions. But the rupture in Satartia underscores growing concerns across the communities that face the prospect of more CO2 pipelines being built to address climate change. Safety advocates and community residents worry about pipeline safety and gaps in federal regulation, says Bill Karam, executive director of the nonprofit Pipeline Safety Trust. We're looking at these pipelines being a lot closer to people and communities than they are right now. We're not ready. That was a quote by Bill Karam. I feel like I'm losing the thread. All right. Wow, this is a very long thing. I'm not going to read it all word for word. But yeah, that's the basic amount of information I was able to glean. And I hope you learned something, because I think I did. And I think this is something that people should be aware of. So, yeah, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. If you'd like me to attempt to report on news things, leave a comment. Or just leave a comment on whatever you'd like me to read. I don't know. Have a good day, everyone.